People underestimate the impact they have on others. We go through life assuming that our actions, our words, and even our presence are just small ripples in a vast ocean. But the truth is, every interaction, every moment of connection, and every relationship we build leaves an imprint. Think about it. When you enter a room, people feel it, whether it's your energy, your confidence, your warmth, or even your silence. You affect the space around you. And when you leave, especially without a word, that absence is just as powerful. You may not realize it, but your presence holds weight. The way you make someone feel, the role you play in their life, and the consistency of your connection all create something tangible. Have you ever had a close friend suddenly stop responding? Maybe a mentor or leader in your life who always gave you guidance just disappeared without warning? How did that make you feel? If you've ever been on the receiving end of someone vanishing from your life, you know the gut-wrenching feeling of confusion, loss, and even self-doubt that can creep in. It's not just the words we say that shape people, it's the consistency of our presence. Presence is power, it's influence, it's leadership, whether you intend it or not. When you are there for people, showing up, engaging, being present, you create a sense of trust, reliability, and security. This is true in friendships, romantic relationships, workplaces, and even casual social circles. People start to associate you with a certain feeling, a certain experience, and when you're gone, that experience doesn't just vanish, it leaves a hole, a question mark, an empty space where you used to be. Most of us don't think about this consciously. We live in our own heads, dealing with our own struggles, and sometimes we believe that stepping away is just a personal decision with no real consequences. But that's far from the truth. When you suddenly remove yourself from someone's life, you disrupt more than just a conversation or a routine. You disrupt a connection. Imagine you're watching a TV series that you've become invested in. The story is unfolding, the characters are developing, and then, out of nowhere, the show is canceled mid-season. No finale, no explanation, just an abrupt stop. How frustrating is that? It leaves you hanging, wondering what happened, feeling robbed of closure. That's what happens when people disappear without explanation. Life is built on narratives, and relationships are no different. When someone leaves unexpectedly, they don't just exit, they leave an unresolved story. This is why your presence matters. It matters more than you know. You don't have to be the loudest person in the room. You don't have to be the most charismatic, the funniest, or the most influential. Simply being there, consistently showing up, and making people feel like they can rely on you creates an unspoken bond that people value deeply. Think about the people in your life who have made the biggest impact on you. Chances are, it's not the ones who made a grand entrance, it's the ones who stuck around. The ones who showed up time and time again through the highs and lows. The ones who made you feel seen, heard, and understood. That's the power of presence. Now flip that. Think about the time someone important to you left without warning. The questions that race through your mind, the uncertainty, the feeling of not knowing whether it was something you did or if they just stopped caring. That's the impact of absence. It creates a vacuum, a space, filled with unanswered questions and sometimes even self-doubt. We don't always get to control what happens in life, but we do get to control how we show up or how we choose to disappear. Sometimes stepping away is necessary. Sometimes walking away is the right choice. But there's a difference between leaving with integrity and disappearing without a trace. One creates respect, the other leaves destruction. Being present isn't just about physical proximity. It's about emotional availability, communication, and intentionality. You don't have to be around someone every day to have a presence in their life. A message, a conversation, a moment of honesty, these things matter. They solidify relationships, reinforce trust, and keep connection strong. When you disappear without explanation, you deny people the ability to process, to understand, and to respect your decision. You turn a meaningful connection into an open wound. The people who valued you are left piecing together what went wrong, often blaming themselves or feeling as if they were disposable. What we fail to realize is that people remember how we make them feel. Long after words fade, after time passes, and after memories become blurry, emotions linger. The feeling of security, of trust, of knowing someone was truly there for you, that stays. And so does the sting of unexpected loss. Your presence is your legacy. It's what you leave behind in people's minds and hearts. Whether it's in friendships, relationships, or professional settings, the way you engage with people, how consistently you show up, how honestly you communicate, how deeply you invest, determines the kind of impact you have. Absence speaks just as loudly as presence. When you vanish without warning, you send a message, whether you mean to or not. You tell people they weren't worth an explanation. You tell them they weren't important enough for closure. And even if that's not your intention, that's often how it's perceived. Presence is powerful because it's rare. In a world where people are quick to ghost, to cut ties without a word, to move on without closure, those who choose to show up, communicate, and exit with integrity stand out. They build stronger relationships, earn deeper respect, and leave behind a legacy of trust instead of uncertainty. People don't just remember what you say, they remember how you made them feel. And more often than not, they remember whether you stayed or simply disappeared. When you suddenly disappear from someone's life, the impact isn't just momentary. It's a shockwave that ripples through their emotions, their thoughts, and even their sense of self. You may think that walking away quietly is a neutral act, that it spares both parties from conflict or discomfort, but in reality it creates more than just absence. It creates confusion, pain, and self-doubt in the people left behind. The moment someone realizes you're gone, there's an immediate reaction. At first it's disbelief. They might think it's a misunderstanding. Maybe you're just busy. Maybe something came up. Maybe they're overthinking. They send a message. No response. Another. Still nothing. Their mind starts working overtime, scrambling for an explanation. This is where confusion begins to take hold. Human beings crave understanding. We need to make sense of things, especially when it comes to our relationships. We search for patterns. We analyze behavior. We try to find meaning in the actions of those around us. When someone disappears without a word, that natural need for understanding is denied. And when people don't have answers, they start filling in the blanks themselves. For some, that means replaying every interaction, looking for clues they may have missed. Did they say something wrong? Was there a moment they overlooked? Was there a shift they should have noticed? This overanalysis leads to self-doubt. If there's no clear reason for your disappearance, they might assume the problem is them. Maybe they weren't good enough. Maybe they weren't interesting enough. Maybe they did something to push you away, even if they don't know what it was. This is where the pain starts to settle in. Confusion turns into hurt. When someone values you, whether as a friend, a partner, or even a colleague, your absence isn't just noticed, it's felt. And it's felt deeply. Because when you leave without an explanation, it doesn't just take away your presence, it takes away their sense of security, their trust, their belief that the relationship was built on something real. For some people, this pain turns inward. They begin to question themselves in ways they never did before. They start wondering if they're worthy of consistency, if they're capable of maintaining relationships, if they're just destined to be left behind. They don't just feel the loss of your presence, they feel the erosion of their own self-esteem. For others, the pain turns outward. Frustration builds. Resentment grows. They feel betrayed, not because you left, but because you left without giving them the basic respect of communication. They think back to every moment they invested in you, every conversation, every time they showed up for you, and now they wonder if it meant anything at all. Did you ever care? Were they just fooling themselves? These questions can be more painful than the loss itself. Then there's the fear that this will happen again, the fear that people are temporary, that no matter how much someone seems to care, they can vanish at any moment with no warning, no explanation, no closure. Once someone experiences that kind of unexpected loss, it doesn't just affect how they see you, it affects how they see everyone. It plants a seed of doubt that can grow into full-blown distrust. And this is the true emotional shockwave. It doesn't stop at one person, it spreads. The way you leave someone affects the way they approach future relationships. The person who once believed in open communication might start holding back, afraid of getting too close. The person who used to trust easily might start expecting people to leave before they even get a chance to stay. For some, the emotional weight becomes too much. They shut down. They stop expecting people to be reliable. They build walls. And maybe you didn't intend to do this. Maybe you thought disappearing was the easiest option, that it would cause the least damage. But what you don't see is the lasting impact. The way that one act of leaving without a word can change how someone sees themselves, others, and relationships as a whole. Some people never get an answer, so they carry that pain forward. They may try to suppress it, distract themselves, act like it doesn't bother them, but deep down, it lingers. Because when someone who mattered to you is suddenly gone, it doesn't just hurt in the moment, it leaves an imprint on your emotional world. The shockwave doesn't just fade, it echoes. We often think of silence as nothingness, as an absence, as an empty space where words, explanations, or closure should be. But the truth is, silence is never neutral. It speaks just as loudly, sometimes even louder than words ever could. When you disappear from someone's life without explanation, your silence is a statement. It tells a story, whether you meant for it to or not. People interpret silence in different ways, but one thing remains consistent: it always carries meaning. It is human nature to seek answers, to try to understand the motives behind someone's actions. And when no explanation is given, the mind doesn't just stop searching, it fills in the blanks with its own conclusions. Those conclusions might not reflect reality, but they become the truth in the mind of the person left behind. At first, silence is confusing. The person wonders if there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe they missed something. Maybe they did something wrong without realizing it. They replay past conversations, scanning for a clue. They check their messages, wondering if they said something off-putting. They hesitate to reach out again, not wanting to seem desperate, but the uncertainty gnaws at them. Then, as time passes, silence becomes something more than just confusion. It becomes rejection. They begin to see it as intentional. If someone vanishes without a word, what else is there to believe other than the fact that they simply didn't care enough to explain? The silence tells them you weren't worth an answer. You weren't important enough for closure. You didn't matter as much as you thought you did. Silence breeds insecurity. When someone walks away without communication, it leaves the other person questioning their own worth. Was I not enough? Was I too much? Did I overestimate our connection? Even the most confident individuals can't help but feel the sting of being disregarded without explanation. Because in a world where words are easy to give, withholding them is a choice. And that choice sends a message. For some, silence triggers anger, frustration builds because there is no resolution, no opportunity to express emotions, no chance to ask questions. It feels unfair because it is. Healthy relationships, even when they end, involve communication. They allow for understanding, for mutual closure, for respect. But when someone disappears without a word, they strip the other person of that opportunity. They remove any possibility of clarity and leave only uncertainty behind. Then silence turns into something else entirely. It turns into a lesson. People learn from the way they are treated. And when someone leaves without a word, the person left behind learns not to trust as easily. They learn that people can disappear at any moment, that words don't always mean anything, that consistency is not guaranteed. Silence becomes an experience they carry forward, affecting the way they approach future relationships. Some people internalize that lesson in the worst way possible. They decide that vulnerability is dangerous, that emotional openness is a risk not worth taking. They withdraw. They become guarded. They fear attachment because they've learned through silence that people can walk away without warning. And for others, silence creates resentment. The lack of communication, the lack of basic decency, the lack of respect doesn't just hurt in the moment, it lingers. It becomes a wound that doesn't heal easily. The unanswered questions, the unresolved emotions, the sudden absence all create a lasting imprint. And the worst part, the person who left often has no idea of the damage they caused. What people don't realize is that silence is rarely forgotten. Long after time has passed, long after memories fade, what remains is how someone's absence made the other person feel. A simple conversation, a few honest words, a moment of clarity. These things could have provided closure, but silence leaves a scar. It stays with people, shaping how they see relationships, how they view themselves, and how they trust others in the future. Silence might seem like an escape, like an easy way out, like a way to avoid conflict or discomfort. But in reality, it is a choice that carries consequences. It is never just silence. It is a statement, it is a message, and it is one that people will remember. Disappearing without a word might feel like an easy way out, a way to avoid conflict, discomfort, or difficult conversations. But what most people don't realize is that walking away in silence doesn't just affect the person left behind. It reflects something about the person who disappears. Every action we take, and even the ones we avoid, teaches us something about who we are, and the moment we choose to leave without communication, we miss out on one of life's most important lessons, ownership. Ownership is about accountability. It's about recognizing the impact of your actions and facing the reality of how you affect the people around you. It's about maturity, self-awareness, and emotional responsibility. When we fail to own our choices, when we avoid confrontation, when we slip away in silence, we are avoiding ourselves. Many people believe that disappearing is a form of protection. They tell themselves that by leaving quietly, they are sparing the other person from unnecessary pain. They convince themselves that avoiding an awkward or emotional conversation is better for everyone. But in truth, avoidance doesn't protect anyone. It just transfers pain in a different way. It leaves behind questions, confusion, and wounds that take longer to heal. And perhaps worst of all, it prevents personal growth. Because growth only happens when we face the things that make us uncomfortable, when we step into difficult conversations, when we own the decisions we make and communicate them with honesty. Running away doesn't make a problem disappear, it just shifts the emotional burden onto someone else. Instead of carrying the weight of honesty, the person who leaves forces the other to carry the weight of uncertainty. And yet, people disappear all the time. Friendships fade without explanation. Romantic partners leave without closure. Business relationships dissolve with no discussion. It's easier to walk away than to confront the truth. But easy doesn't mean right. What most people don't realize is that avoiding closure doesn't just affect the person left behind, it also affects the person who leaves. Because every time you avoid a difficult conversation, every time you disappear instead of addressing a situation, you reinforce a pattern. You teach yourself that you don't have to face challenges, that you don't have to take responsibility, that you can just walk away whenever things get too hard. And that pattern follows you. Think about it. If you make a habit of ghosting friendships, what happens when things get difficult in a relationship? If you're used to avoiding accountability, how will that show up in your career, in your family, in your ability to build meaningful connections? The way you handle small moments of discomfort sets the foundation for how you handle bigger challenges in life. Owning your decisions doesn't mean you owe everyone endless explanations. It doesn't mean you have to justify every choice you make. But it does mean being honest. It means respecting the people who have been part of your journey enough to give them clarity. It means standing behind your actions instead of running from them. There is power in saying, this is where I am. This is what I need. This is why I'm making this choice. That kind of honesty, even when difficult, builds strength. It creates respect both for yourself and from others. And it allows for real closure. the kind that doesn't leave scars. When you disappear without explanation, you take away someone's ability to process, to understand, to heal. But when you take ownership, when you communicate with clarity and respect, you give people the chance to move forward in a healthy way. And in doing so, you also give yourself the opportunity to grow. Because real power isn't an escape, it's an ownership. It's in standing firm in your decisions, in facing the discomfort, in being strong enough to have the conversations that matter. Growth doesn't happen in avoidance. It happens when we take responsibility for the impact we have on others. It happens when we choose honesty over silence. It happens when we stop running and start owning who we are